So welcome everybody. We're delighted to have such a good turnout, so thank you for coming. I'd like to give a special welcome to His Excellency Archbishop Flavio Pace, Secretary of the Dicastery for the Promotion of Christian Unity. I give it in advance because I think he has yet to arrive. Already well arrived is His Excellency Bishop Brian Farrell, Secretary Emeritus of the same dicastery and a great friend of the Gregorian. Also His Excellency Professor Sima Aramovic, the Serbian ambassador to the Holy See, who's very proud to welcome our speaker tonight, who's from Serbia. Any other ambassadors to the Holy See, they are most welcome. I'm not sure if I noticed any ambassadors. Representatives of my own embassy, the Irish embassy, I recognise. So we are grateful for your presence with us. Members of the other denominations here, there's a strong ecumenical circle here in Rome, and we see a number of representatives here who I hope will speak up when it comes to question time. We're very pleased to welcome Professor Hyacinth Destivel, Director of the Institute of Ecumenical Studies at the Angelicum, as well as a member of the Dicastery for Ecumenism, with whom we are increasingly collaborating in our programme for ecumenical studies in the Gregorian. You will have seen some of these dépliants, these brochures that advertise our licentiate in ecumenical studies. But our confreres and consorelle in the Angelicum and the Ecumenical Institute there, we welcome those of you who are from that institute. So a special word of welcome to Pastor Patrick Spitzenberger, Director of the Centro Melantone. However, I've heard that he's unable to come. I've just received his apologies. A word for, you might say, his representative, is also his predecessor, who is here, Professor Martin Wallraff. This Centro Melantone, which has Lutheran students based in Rome, so any of those of you who are students in that institute who are with us this evening, you're also most welcome. So now, without any further ado, I should introduce myself, of course. I'm Father Jerry Whelan. I'm moderator of this licentiate it's got a longer name, but Ecumenical Studies. I am also the director of the Department of Fundamental Theology. But really, we work as a team with this ecumenical programme. So I'd like to give special thanks to Father Keith Pecklers, who has put in a great deal of effort into organising this event tonight, to Father Amaury Begas, who has advertised us with the majority of these students, can I guess, are from the Department of Dogmatic Theology. So we're very grateful for the interest that seems to be growing in the dogmatic department in ecumenical matters. And then not to forget our Dean of Theology, who is effectively the founder of this ecumenical studies program here at the Gregorian and does more than his fair share of work in the actual details of running this licentiate in ecumenical studies. So we move on. So Professor Andrej Jeftic, who will be our speaker tonight, is a Serbian Orthodox theologian and since 2022 is the director of the Commission on Faith and Order at the World Council of Churches in Geneva. He also serves as adjunct professor at the Bose Ecumenical Institute. Since 2013, he has served on the Central Committee of the World Council of Churches, and since 2018 as a member of the World Council's Assembly Planning Committee. Prior to his move to Geneva, Professor Jeftic served as a professor in the Faculty of Orthodox Theology at the University of Belgrade, and then as research fellow at the university's Institute of Philosophy and Social Theory. During that time, he also served as a theological consultant for the Serbian Orthodox Church's Commission for Migrants in Europe. A deeply committed ecumenist since his university days in Belgrade, Professor Jeftic is convinced that for its own credibility, all theology must be ecumenical, and it must also be universal. In his own words, if locked within imagined boundaries, either academic or ecclesial, theology fails to offer its service to the world whose salvation was brought upon by Christ. He has published widely in areas of patristic theology and philosophy, systematic theology, contemporary orthodox theology, and the philosophy and theology of science. At the moment, he is heavily involved in preparations for the 6th World Conference on Faith and Order to take place in Alexandria, Egypt, in late October. Please join me in welcoming Professor Jeftic.
Good evening, and thank you very much for coming. I'm very humbled and honored and privileged to be with you today, and I'm also humbled and excited about the turnout and to see many of the familiar faces, many of you who I'm yet to get to know, and I thank you for expressing your interest and coming to attend this lecture, but hopefully also to have a conversation on the search for visible unity, which is the topic and the theme of our this evening presentation. I would like to begin, first of all, by expressing my sincere gratitude to the Faculty of Theology of the Gregorian University and the university itself for hosting me and welcoming me. I feel like I honestly feel like at home at this moment, although it's been only a single day that I've been at the Gregorian. And also, particularly, I would like to thank Professor Keith Pecklers, who I can also call my dear friend, although this is our second encounter, but I also feel that we have known each other for years already, for hosting me and for really putting a lot of effort into organizing this lecture, but our morning lecture as well. Here at the university. So, in responding to the theme of my today's presentation, which is on the search for full visible unity, I would like to start with a question and invite you to ask ourselves the question which is actually the theme of the upcoming 6th World Conference on Faith and Order that was already mentioned. And that question is, where now for visible unity? The conference is scheduled for October next year in Alexandria in Egypt, and it aims to commemorate the 1700th anniversary of the Council of Nicaea, the first ecumenical council, and advance the cause of unity among all Christians. So, as you can see, this is an open-ended question, and obviously I don't intend to provide a definite answer today, not only because doing so might make the global conference unnecessary, but because the question itself requires obviously more than a single presentation to be addressed comprehensively. So instead, I will focus on offering reflections on what is entailed in the question itself. And specifically, I will consider why we need to ask ourselves this question and why now, particularly in connection with the commemoration of the First Ecumenical Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. So to explore these reflections, I will structure my presentation in 3 parts, and they will be formed around 3 questions that I want to ask. So in terms of the search for visible unity, where do we come from? I want to acknowledge and take a look at the history and major achievements of the ecumenical movement. Secondly, to ask the question, where are we now in our search for unity? To examine the challenges and complexities of our present moment. And finally, to ask, where do we go from here? Look at the road ahead and offer some reflections on the path that lies ahead of us. So where do we come from? Anyone engaged in ecumenism has heard the call for visible unity probably countless times. And over time, repetition can make things seem dull or even frustrating, especially if it seems that little change is observed. It may feel like we are repeating our call and pronouncing it into the void without hearing ourselves or others offering a clear response to it. However, I would argue that the first thing that we have to acknowledge is that this call does not originate from us, either as theologians, as faithful, as clergymen, or as churches. It is rather God's call. And it is not merely a human aspiration, but a divine prayer, as expressed in the words of Christ himself, offered in the prayer to the Father, praying that they all may be one. Numerous bilateral but also multilateral theological dialogues. Through the establishment of, that might be a kind of a one-time thing, so we offer a response and that's it. On the contrary, as with any God's calling, it is issued to each individual, or to each person, to each community, and to every generation. So every single one of those is called and has no option but to offer their own response again and again. On the other hand, if we do focus on the ecumenical movement, churches and institutions, we might not have been failing, and I would argue, to respond, but paradoxically might have become too successful in answering to this call, to the extent that we take the progress that we have made for granted. And I think that the ecumenical movement has achieved significant progress and gone through many milestones that we often tend to overlook because they have become intrinsic parts of our reality. And as with any other reality that seems omnipresent, one is rarely aware of it. Therefore, in the first part of my presentation, in responding to the question, where do we come from, I would like to underline some ways in which the churches have sought to give response to this calling, and also highlight what I deem to be great achievements of the ecumenical movement. Obviously, coming here among you as the representative of the World Council of Churches, I have to start with the World Council of Churches. It's my kind of professional duty to do so. So one of the greatest achievements in this regard is the existence and the establishment of the World Council of Churches, but also its continuous work until today. So since its founding in 1948, the WCC has united churches from across the globe, spanning different confessions, traditions, and so on. And today it includes 352 churches representing over 580 million Christians from more than 150 countries. Now that might not seem a lot for the Roman Catholics, but it is a lot for the Protestants and the Orthodox. It cannot be, I believe, but God's doing that the churches managed to stay together throughout all of these decades. And these decades have seen much of very difficult times and different challenges. I guess most of us, or all of us here, are theologians, and we know how easily and how eager theologians are to disagree and to challenge one another and to contest and to argue over theological matters. Spending a day in a conference or a week in a theological conference, I think everybody's experience can testify to this. So imagine what it takes to persist over so many decades in staying together and also moving together, where you have a group of theologians coming from such diverse traditions and cultural backgrounds as well. So not only that the World Council of Churches has managed to stay together, but also to move together, and doing so by reflecting together on theological issues, seeking justice for the marginalized and oppressed, by witnessing together the hope of Christ to the broken world, and by servicing the needs of the humanity and creation. So therefore, I would argue that the sole existence of the WCC to this day is a testimony of the churches and countless individuals responding to God's call to unity. And as you might well know, starting from the 1960s, the WCC has established a working relationship and a partnership with the Roman Catholic Church. From 1965 until today, we have the joint working group between the Roman Catholic Church and the WCC as the main space for collaboration and oversight of the joint ecumenical efforts. Since 1968, two major developments have also taken place. First, the Catholic Church has joined the Faith and Order Commission as a full member, the commission that I'm in charge of. And secondly, as a result of that, the Week of Prayer for Christian Unity has been prepared by the joint efforts of what was called then the Secretariat for Promoting Christian Unity and, on the other hand, Faith and Order Commission. But coming back to the call to be the one church, and the question have the churches been able to fulfill this calling to visible unity? And I would like to offer a kind of an optimistic perspective on this and argue that in many ways the churches have been successful in responding to this call, because I believe that this call to visible unity is of multi-dimensional rather than one-dimensional reality. And I'll come back to that point a bit later on. So the response to the call has been given in different forms, such as, for example, the establishment of united and uniting churches, which have united in a form of organic unity, so to say. Secondly, through the doctrinal consensus or convergence, which has resulted from numerous bilateral but also multilateral theological dialogues. Through the establishment of communion or reconciled communion of churches, through the formation of ecumenical bodies, through shared worship and spiritual practices, and so on. So to come back to the point about the multidimensional nature of this call. This reality has taken shape in various ways. So some churches have fully united in the form of organic unity, while others have retained their independence while forming administrative unity at national levels. As mentioned, theological dialogues have also resulted in significant doctrinal consensus. For example, one might refer to the 1999 Joint Declaration on the Doctrine of Justification signed between Catholics and Lutherans, later also affirmed by other Christian world communions, but also to some of the documents produced by the Faith and Order Commission, such as the famous Baptism, Eucharist, and Ministry, the so-called BEM document, published back in 1982, or the more recent one, The Church Towards a Common Vision, published in 2013. So, in this span of time, especially since the 1970s, when the Roman Catholic Church has initiated a number of bilateral theological dialogues, many outcomes of the doctrinal agreements have resulted either in the reconciliation of the communions and the establishment of the Eucharistic fellowship or the communions of churches. But beyond doctrine, practical reconciliation between confession has also taken place. So, for example, we might refer to the 1973 Loyenberg Agreement, which brought Lutheran and Reformed churches into closer fellowship, while, on the other hand, the 1992 Porvoo Common Statement established full communion among Anglican and Lutheran churches in Europe. So these agreements show that in many cases, visible unity is already manifested and exists in very concrete ways and forms. Another example or a reality that we might refer to are the ecumenical communities. So you know of ecumenical communities such as Thésée, Bose Monastery, Sisters of Grand Champ, and others who embody unity through common life and prayer, published back in 1982, or the more recent one, The Church Towards a Common Vision, published in 2013. Institutional or theological matter, but also that it can be a lived reality. On the other hand, academic institutions in the forms of ecumenical institutes, such as, for example, the Bosse Institute that was mentioned, or the study program in comparative theology of Christian traditions and ecumenical studies, which is conducted at this very institution. They serve as ecumenical hubs which foster dialogue and reflection and further fuel and stimulate the ecumenical movement. And these institutions and programs ensure that the ecumenical theology is not static, but continues to develop in response to new challenges and insights, and engages new generations. Moving on, especially after the Second World War, the churches have started joining in national, regional, and global ecumenical organizations. So, for example, if we look at Europe, we know about the Council, CEC, a Council of European Churches, which was constituted in 1959. But most of the countries in Europe, a lot of countries in other parts of the world, and in most of the regions and continents of the world, have found and established the regional ecumenical organizations or the national councils of churches. Globally, again, for example, organizations such as ACT Alliance gather church ministries which are focused on diaconal and service work. They have more than 140 members and work on humanitarian aid, gender and climate justice, migration, displacement, peace and security, and aim to support the local communities. And in addition to these spaces, the Conference of Secretaries of Christian World Communions offers yet another space for mutual learning, sharing, and growth. Furthermore, one of the most tangible manifestations of visible unity is shared spiritual life and worship. And I've already mentioned the annual Week of Prayer for Christian Unity, which continues to be a powerful expression of Christians praying together for unity across the globe. And every year, I can say that the WCC website is most visited during the Week of Prayer for Christian Unity, when the materials produced together by the Dicastery and the Faith and Order Commission are being downloaded. And this is one of our most successful parts of our work. But yet again, we are thinking about the season of creation, and now also about the movement which is aiming to introduce a Feast of Creation, observed in September, and provides yet another example of how churches of different traditions come together to reflect on their shared responsibility, but also to share their spiritual gifts with one another. So all of these numbers of developments, the doctrinal agreements, the academic institutions, the lived ecumenical communities, the shared spiritual experiences and observances, all of them witness to the fact that I would like to encourage us to think of is that instead of thinking about visible unity as something that is there or not, like being dead or alive, for example, I believe we should think about it as a multi-dimensional process which is taking place on many levels of our church life, and which is not static, but is marked by dynamism of lived reality and constant growth. So it might be that not all of Christians in each place have the full visible unity now, but I believe we have been in this process, and in that process we have indeed been growing in visible unity in this multi-dimensional way. So, asking the second question, where are we now? So at various points in recent years, some or many have spoken of so-called ecumenical winter, a period of stagnation in the ecumenical movement. There is this sensation of fatigue in some circles, as if the great successes of the past now serve actually not to prove that we have come a long way, but on the contrary, that the movement has exhausted its potential. And besides the numbered successes, which for some seem to demonstrate exactly this, that we have exhausted our potential, there were numerous other issues that have become challenging for the churches. And these have made the churches to focus more on facing their own challenges and tackling their own issues, disunities and divisions within themselves, instead of seeking to overcome those that threat their mutual relationships. And I will cut back to that point a bit later on. So, as the churches have grown in unity, they have also internally become divided. Especially in recent decades, internal divisions within churches have intensified. Disputes over theology and ethics especially continue to fragment Christian communities. And these divisions are intensified by differences in cultural contexts, but also in the pressure of navigating global issues relating to migration, economic and ecological challenges, political, military struggles, issues of gender, sexuality, and so on. Moreover, some of these divides reflect a deeper fragmentation within society itself, where polarization over political and cultural issues infiltrates and heavily impacts church life. Churches struggle to hold together diverse perspectives while remaining faithful to their traditions. And these fractures, fractions, polarizations, divisions, and disunities make it increasingly difficult for churches to sustain their ecumenical engagement. Many are so focused on navigating their internal crisis that they lack the capacity to address ecumenical concerns. So I would say that this creates a sort of a paradox, because even as churches move toward greater unity on a global scale, they are also at the same time struggling with internal fragmentation. And given these realities, I would say we must reassess our approach to visible unity. Which brings me to my third question: where do we go from here? So, how do we take advantage of the successes and the progress we have made while learning from our mistakes as we face these new challenges in the ecumenical landscape? How do we still keep the journey toward visible unity alive? And where do we go from here in our pursuit of it? Late Lucas Fisher, who was my predecessor in the position of the Director of the Faith and Order, once observed the following, and I quote, "The ecumenical movement is not simply the way from confessional divisions to the manifestation of visible unity. It is rather a cross-section of the Church's constant effort to make real the unity it speaks of in the creeds, to make it visible where it has been obscured, to maintain it where it is threatened, and finally to recover it where it has been lost." And my belief is that this position or perspective still holds value to this day. And I believe that the way forward involves all of these three approaches: making unity visible where it has been obscured, maintaining the unity and preserving it where we already have achieved it, and recovering it where it has been lost. And in an analogous way that we speak of 4 marks of the Church, being one, holy, Catholic, and apostolic, I believe that these 3 key ideas or concepts can be observed as the three marks of this process, which I deem to be multidimensional, of growth in unity. Looking again at these marks might help us discern our way forward. So the first one being making visible unity that is already existing. This, in some faith and other processes, has been called the unearthing of the unity we share. And what these processes have been, especially in the recent years, have been constantly telling us is that what unites us actually is far greater than what divides us as Christians. And as we pursue the visible unity, first of all, we need to do a bit of digging and unveiling of that what has become obscured through the course of history or due to our own negligence. In that regard specifically, I would say that commemorating the Council of Nicaea gives us a blessing and a particular special opportunity to revisit some of the foundational expressions of unity. And this is, first of all, unity in doctrine. So thinking about the Nicene Constantinopolitan Creed as a common denominator for many church traditions. And I think that we should and need to use the opportunity to, and seize the opportunity to readdress the importance of this creed for our churches. Again, by embracing the small steps. And some of the new agreements on the creed, such as, for example, the one that was recently signed between the Orthodox and the Lutherans on the wording of the Nicene Constantinopolitan Creed, but also on the understanding of the Filioque clause, provides a promising case, I would say. Secondly, the unity in sacraments, particularly through the shared recognition of baptism. And I think further than that, acknowledging and recognizing each other baptism, perhaps moving in our ecclesiological conversations more towards reframing the ecclesiological conversations around the baptism that we share, can provide us with more ground and unveil this unity that we already have, rather than exclusively and only focusing on the lack of full Eucharistic fellowship, which we still don't share in many cases. So by reapproaching, reassessing, and reframing the conversation and putting baptism in the first and in the front, I would say can help us actually rediscover the unity that we already share. Another aspect is the unity that we share in spirituality and cultural practices. So sharing of spiritual gifts, which has been and has becoming more intense in recent years. And it is an important aspect of the receptive ecumenism. Spiritual practices and so on. So to come back to the point about the again, unveiling and unearthing the unity in church structures and ethos. And here in particular, I would like to invite us to think about the Council of Nicaea and the fact that more and more churches are exploring synodality as a model for reflection and decision-making and for inclusion of different parts of one body in this in the joint work in the joint life of the church. So in that regard, Nicaea really, I believe, offers an opportunity to be inspired by this first global synodal gathering in the history of the Christian church. And in that regard, I'm also very pleased to say that I come from the Orthodox tradition, but here I would say that the Roman Catholic Church is taking the lead and offering us an example to all of our traditions on how to rethink synodality in our churches. Now I would come to the second mark of this process. So the first one being revealing the unity we have. The second one, protecting or maintaining the unity that is threatened. This can be also done on different levels, on the level of churches, on the level of ecumenical fellowships, but also on the level of common witness and practice. On the church level, this entails seeking to maintain the unity within our churches and church families, which is, as I mentioned, becoming increasingly difficult. But I also wonder if this humbling experience might not potentially and paradoxically unite us and point us to the fact that not only that we are united in facing the challenges of our own disunities, but also direct us to one another as we seek to support each other in facing the disunities within our own communities. As an ecumenical fellowship, this maintaining unity entails seeking to continue joint efforts and collaboration in ecumenical bodies, and I've already mentioned a number of those, but also in other ecumenical structures, so regional ecumenical organizations, bilateral dialogues, national councils of churches, and so on. And finally, maintaining unity in witness and service means striving for justice, peace, care for creation. And while this comes very natural for some of the churches, not least some of the Protestant churches, my experience, at least, has shown that this aspect of our common journey is often neglected for other church traditions, but can actually lead and help us discover or maintain the unity where it is threatened. As we know, these visions are easy to create, but difficult to reconcile. And we must approach this work of maintaining unity with vigilance and care, because the fragile unity, and it is indeed fragile in many ways, that we have achieved as churches, as communions, as ecumenical bodies and organizations, can easily be eroded. And as we do so, we must be open to new ways of living out unity. As the statement issued at the WCC Karlsruhe Assembly reminds us, the concept of visible unity itself is subject to change. So our commitment, expectations, models of unity should also evolve in response to the Spirit's leading and the needs of our time. And in that regard, we need to open up the space for the Spirit's guidance, be flexible, receptive of each other, and open to diversity and nonconformity. And finally, coming to the third mark of this process, which is recovering unity that was lost. So this healing of divisions and restoring unity is not merely an aspiration, but a responsibility that calls for intentional action. The journey begins with reconciliation, a process of addressing historical wounds, and fostering relationships built on trust. True unity, it is often emphasized, cannot be achieved without justice, ensuring that our togetherness is not just a structural arrangement, but also an ethical commitment, the one that prioritizes the needs of the marginalized and the oppressed ones. And at the heart of this unity is our shared belief in Jesus Christ as the resurrected Son of God. Whether expressed through the Nicene Creed or some other formulations, this faith remains our common foundation. And a particular tangible and symbolic expression of this unity lies in the ongoing dialogue about a unified date for Easter. A conversation that I would say holds the potential to visibly affirm our oneness as the body of Christ. And as already mentioned several times, this multidimensional and multi-level layered reality of this process of growth of unity has to be also seen here. It begins individually, I would say, in our daily lives and relationships, where reconciliation and justice take root in personal encounters and friendships, as we kept repeating these days. but it extends to congregations and the communities through shared worship, joint mission, and common witness. But it also must be pursued academically, where in the places and spaces where future leaders are equipped with an ecumenical vision, ensuring that the call to unity is passed on to the generations to come. Now, before I conclude with what you might deem as a kind of a too optimistic view of our journey of unity, allow me to name some of the challenges to this growth in unity that we are seeking. And I have already mentioned some of them. And the first one was self-centeredness. So we are facing profound crisis in today's world. Wars, economic instability, forced migration, environmental degradation, fragmentation and polarization of societies, and so on. And as already mentioned, churches are struggling to sustain their own structures, to sustain and keep their own membership, and also to maintain their own resources. Therefore, the energy of the churches is often directed in this way toward internal consolidation rather than outward collaboration. And therefore, instead of prioritizing the ecumenical engagement, churches seek security in their own traditions and identities, reinforcing their separateness rather than their shared mission. This defensive posture, as I think we are all aware, hinders Christian unity, and when churches focus on self-preservation, they risk losing sight of their broader calling. The challenge here then is to shift from an attitude of self-orientation to one of openness, where the churches recognize that their own renewal and vitality are tied to their engagement with the others. So unity is not an optional luxury in this case that the churches, if they are well off, can afford, but really even in the time and in the state of crisis that they are in and their own disunities, I would say it is a necessity for authentic Christian witness in today's broken world. The second challenge relates to doing the things in the same old-fashioned ways, I would say. The ecumenical movement has this long and rich history that I referred in the first part of my presentation, but at times it risks becoming very stagnant because it relies too heavily on established institutional patterns. Many ecumenical initiatives operate in predictable ways. Dialogues, commissions, I shouldn't be saying that this is a director of the commission, but nevertheless, declarations, without always fostering real transformation, especially on the grassroots level. We all know institutions are essential for structuring ecumenical engagement, but on the other hand, I would say, over-dependence on them can lead to a sometimes sensation of a too bureaucratic approach that lacks the dynamism and creativity needed for real change to happen. So I think the challenge there is really to rediscover ecumenism and some of the old enthusiasm which the ecumenism would bring among the churches and Christians as a living movement and not only merely an institutional effort. And this would mean really fostering encounters that go beyond official dialogues, and I would say that this is pretty much that kind of an encounter, which encounters that encourage local communities, congregations, academic institutions, individuals to engage in this kind of shared space and shared reflection and the mutual reception, so to say. So unity is not built only through diplomatic agreements between church leaders, but it is also perhaps even more so built and nurtured through the daily lives of Christians who learn to walk together in faith. Another challenge that I would like to make is the one that Rowan Williams named as ecumenical Esperanto. he has critiqued the tendency to develop this, what he called the ecumenical Esperanto, which is a theological language that seeks to be universally relatable and understandable to everyone, but in reality is spoken by no one. And this phenomenon, I would say, arises when theological expressions become so carefully crafted to avoid any controversy, to the extent that they tend to lose their depth, specificity, and the capacity to inspire. So instead of bridging the divides, such language often leads to vague affirmations that do not truly address the core theological and ecclesial differences that still separate Christians. The challenge here is to find a way to speak truthfully and meaningfully about both our common faith and our differences. So unity should not reduce our theology to the lowest common denominator, but should help us to learn to articulate our beliefs in ways that foster deeper understanding. So the true ecumenism, I believe, should not fear theological complexity or the theological controversies or even conflicts and disagreements, but it should embrace it as a part of the journey toward greater communion. And that brings me to my next point in relation to the challenges, which is the one of neglecting the differences. So one of the risks, I would say, in ecumenical engagement is precisely this, the tendency to downplay or ignore differences rather than engage with them constructively. And I remember Bishop Brian Farrell, who is here with us, emphasizing this at the Karlsruhe Assembly, speaking about the fact that the unity does not require uniformity, but also demands developing a kind of hermeneutics of difference, a way of interpreting and understanding our distinct traditions, practices, and theological emphasis in a manner that leads to deeper communion rather than division. And if I misunderstood you, Your Eminence, you will correct me. Too often, ecumenical dialogues aim to find common ground while sidestepping difficult theological and ecclesiological divergences. But as I said, and I repeat here, true unity requires more than just affirming what we share. It really demands creating a kind of a brave space and the courage to engage with our differences in a spirit that is constructive, it's mutually respectful, and has substantial theological depth. So the challenge there is not to raise distinctions, but to understand them as part of the richness of the Christian tradition, and also as one of the key factors in our growth in unity as well. Which brings me to my conclusion. If we think of the one church as the body of Christ, we can extend this analogy to consider what happens when a body is weary, injured, or dysfunctional. First of all, simply put, recovery takes time, and the healing does not happen overnight. It requires careful attention to each step of the process, and there are different steps in the process of healing injured body. And these steps must not be taken for granted, but cherished and intentionally embraced. And my plea here would be not to allow for any of those steps in this process to slip from our hands, or to be omitted, neglected, or forgotten. On the other hand, the healthy and vibrant aspects of the body must be nurtured, and the areas in need of healing demand care, patience, and commitment. And it is only through this balanced and thoughtful approach that the body can regain its strength and fulfill its divine calling. So concluding, I would say, let us not give up on that calling, because it is God Himself who is calling us. And it is Christ's own body rather than some other body that is suffering. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Jeftic. Professor Jeftic, actually, we have been exhausting him. He's been in meetings all day long. But one of the things he was saying was that he was feeling embarrassed that we were getting him to do all the talking, and that he would really like to encounter some of us, or at least listen to questions. So we now have about 40 minutes, and we would like to proceed in that spirit. Just before doing that, if I may just give a brief summary of what I've heard, and perhaps this can give you a moment to consider what your question is, what you might like to ask. I might just note that everybody's welcome to ask a question or to make a comment, and we have different dimensions of our audience. We have representatives of other Christian denominations here and other professors of theology, and we have many students, and if I can speak from the Roman Catholic side, we can be very ignorant, so please don't be afraid of stupid questions, shall we say, if that's where your category, how you feel where you're at. So anyway, very briefly, the introduction, the theme of visible unity. It's a non-neutral term. It has a bit of punch to it in the title today, and that it has its dimensions that we know we're not at yet, and we don't apologize for still seeking it. Still, with the introduction of Professor Jeftic, there was a very realistic tone. These are not easy days for ecumenism. So right from the beginning, he was acknowledging that. And he was simply saying, well, look, it's God's demand of us, and you just keep on trying. This is not exactly a results-based motivation. To be Christian is to search for unity. So moving on then, the three parts of his talk: where have we come from in the search for visible unity? Where are we now? Where to go next? Where have we come from? While acknowledging, the realistic set of problems, stressing that we don't just get inappropriately disillusioned here, and we recognize how very far we have come. Let's say from 1910, the Edinburgh Conference, the founding of the World Council of Churches, more or less then. But then Vatican II, the 1960s. What has changed? Older people amongst us are aware of that, and that has not been lost. So that's where are we coming from. Where are we now? Well, the term ecumenical winter is much used. Once again, just this very realistic point. I found it so fascinating. The frank acknowledgement that there are internal divisions within churches now, and that can take up a lot of energy. And sometimes we forget we might be offending people in other churches as we're working out how not to offend each other within our own church, you might say. So very realistic, where are we now? Where are we going? Once again, invoking this principle of, look, it's God's work. You just have to keep going. And remember the joy of this work, the joy of the spiritual encounter that we have with our fellow Christians as always motivating keeping on going. And then an aspect that I find typical of the Faith and Order Commission that I really liked is don't dumb down theology. No need to go into this theological Esperanto. What a beautiful phrase. I'll talk a bit later maybe, but that's exactly at the heart of our image for our licentiate here in theology of comparative traditions and ecumenical studies. To know the traditions is to know where the real differences are, and not to be afraid of articulating them with clarity, because without the clarity of stating what we believe, we don't have a real unity, an assent to something that we can be in agreement about. That's my brief summary. Where do you feel you land? What stimulates you in those areas? So now, over to you. Any questions? Anybody who'd like to make a comment or ask a question.
I just wanted to compliment you for the summary. I think you better understood me than I understood myself.
Thank you, Andrej. Well, I've been listening to you for 6 hours today already. No, I exaggerate. But, yes, Martin. Oh, yes, we asked Maria Chiara to work on the microphone. Thank you.
Oh, there it is.
But still, if you get up, because there will be other questions, Maria Chiara. Maria Chiara said she didn't want to ask a question, so she would do the microphone work. Maria Chiara is with a member of our Studi Ecumenici degree. So, yes, thank you.
Matthew Lafferty from the...
If you could start, Matthew, if you could stand. Yeah, thank you.
Matthew Lafferty from the Methodist Ecumenical Office. I wonder if part of the search for full visible unity is understanding what we mean by full visible unity. Mm-hmm. Often our work here in Rome as a Methodist, as a Protestant, working in Rome, we hear that Eucharist is will be the symbol of the end of division and full visible unity. But as a Methodist, it doesn't always make sense, because my Anglican brother, actually my Catholic siblings, can come to Eucharist in our church, whether Catholics would feel comfortable, whether their church law and theology permits that. You gave wonderful examples of many different ways in which we see unity happening, and yet there are various models that Lauenberg is different than Porvoo versus what's happening in ACT Alliance. And so I'm wondering, it's more of a statement question, that what does unity mean for us? And we see it happening, so I think that's part of what you were pointing out to us, that we can see where it's happening without question. But what does full visible unity mean for us in this work that we're doing?
Thank you. That's such an important question. Let's go straight to Andrej. At some point soon, we might take groups of questions, 2 or 3 questions and at a time. But thank you, Andrej.
Thank you. It's good to see you, Matthew, again. It's been a couple of years, since Karlsruhe, I guess. And thank you for this question. I think, my comment would have a couple of points. First of all, especially from the perspective of the WCC, there is no one prescribed model of unity, and we talked about it this morning in the class, that is required of the churches to adopt in order to engage in the search of unity. So it is well received and well accepted, even encouraged, that the church enter this search for unity, perhaps even having completely different, or not completely, but nevertheless different understandings of what they are searching for in this joint effort. That's one thing, but on the other hand, there is this also expectation, or there's this vast affirmation of what this full visible unity entails, which is present from the perspective of the WCC in its constitution. And basically it has 3 elements. It is full Eucharistic fellowship, recognition of the ministries and sacraments, and the common service and witness to the world. It could be summed up pretty much along those lines. What I aimed to do in my presentation, or what I tried to somehow communicate, perhaps not that successfully, is that as much as this kind of vision of full visible unity is helpful, and our understanding of our journey towards it, it is also in a way discouraging if we understand it to be a kind of a reality that is somewhere there in the future to be achieved, but it's constantly we are constantly failing at getting to that reality. So the way that I try to reframe that question is actually not perhaps about the concept of full visible unity itself, but perhaps about the concept of the search for that unity. So to understand it not as a kind of we are heading towards a goal, but their goal is just constantly getting away from us and it's being further in the distance and so on, but to understand that this is not a kind of a one-dimensional reality. So, and unity, okay, we have achieved it or we haven't achieved it and so on. But it happens on different levels and in different layers. And it's something that is very dynamic in the sense that the search already entails the different and various levels of unity that we have achieved. And when we look at the churches and the experience of the fragmentation within the churches or the controversies, the disunities and so on, for example, me as Orthodox, I would often question myself, okay, within the Orthodox tradition, we have this very strong concept of what this unity is, obviously. But I question whether do we have that unity among us as the Orthodox in the first place, as we are seeking to achieve that with other churches or church families? And if we don't live that reality, so perhaps then we can rethink what is it in the first place that we are engaging and how we are engaging with other churches and confessions on the other hand. I don't know if that makes sense in response to your question. So it's not a response about what the visible unity is, and actually it's one of the questions that we are asking in Faith and Order and revisiting, because it's a kind of a generational question. Each, pretty much as with God's calling, every generation has to answer what they are aiming for. But on the other hand, what I think should be the focus of our conversation is the nature of that search, perhaps even more than the nature of the visible unity itself.
Thank you. Father Destivel, so we're bringing in our heavy guns early tonight. Remember, everybody else is welcome also to ask. And by the way, I should have mentioned, in Italian, we can do some spontaneous bad translation from Italian into English. So if you want to ask your question in Italian, you might get the answer in English, but still, Father Destivel.
Professor Jeftic, thank you so much for your very inspiring lecture. I have a question now regarding methodology, the method of dialogue, as Father Jerry prefers the term method than methodology. But yes, you are the director of a multilateral dialogue, yeah, and the methodology is the research for convergences, while the Catholic Church usually promotes and engages in bilateral dialogues. I know we are also a member of the Faith and Order Commission, but usually the methodology we promote, usually the dicastery for Christian unity, is a bilateral approach. That's why we have two sections, Eastern, Western, and the methodology varies according to the different dialogues. It can be hermeneutical approach, it can be receptive ecumenism, it could be differentiated consensus, etc. What is the value what is the value for you of a bilateral approach, and what could be the articulation between the multilateral approach and the bilateral approach?
The articulation?
Between the two types of dialogue, multilateral or bilateral.
Could you just explain what do you mean by articulation?
Well, the mutual how can the bilateral approach enrich the multilateral approach and vice versa? Okay.
Well, I can speak. Should I respond now? Or?
Oh yes.
Okay. Yeah. So Faith and Order, alongside to what we now do. We were some time ago tasked by this body, the Secretaries of Christian World Communions, who wanted to organize particularly the Forum on Bilateral Dialogues to exchange the experiences, the outcomes of the most recent dialogues, to learn about the best practices and to also compare the methodologies and so on. So what Faith and Order used to do some decades ago, and it stopped doing it, I think the last one was organized perhaps in 2007 or 8 or something like that, is that we would organize, mandated by the Christian World Communions, by the secretaries of the Christian World Communions, we would organize the Forum on Bilateral Dialogues, where this conversation would actually take place. So I think it was very beneficial and for the Christian World Communions in the first place to have this place of exchange, but also it was beneficial for us to first of all, to learn about the outcomes, but also to understand how can we relate the bilateral to multilateral dialogues. And the result of this has also been the publication of the Growth in Agreement series that you may have seen, which is trying to sum up, well, the outcomes of all the official and some of the unofficial bilateral dialogues. When it comes to methodology or method, should I say, it's also a thing that is being kind of reconsidered constantly in the Faith and Order work, I would say, over the last years. So convergence might be perceived as one way of doing or reaching an agreement. Being less than consensus, even a differentiated one, but at the same time expressing also sort of increased agreement achieved by the churches themselves. Other study documents have a very different kind of style. Some of them offer individual or church perspectives or traditional perspectives on a given theological issue and so on. One of the recent ones on moral discernment in particular, for example, provides a kind of a technical tool for understanding how does the process of moral discernment take place across the church traditions. So, and another one yet on the pilgrimage of justice and peace, which was, as you know, the kind of overarching paradigm of the work of the Council in the previous period. We produced 3 documents a couple of years ago in this regard, and the methodology was here to address the faithful in an appealing yet theologically deep way. On these matters or on the pilgrimage of justice and peace by having a common voice. So not seeking particular level of doctrinal agreement or tackling the differences and so on, but speaking with a common voice to some of the issues such as pluralism and pluralistic societies, what does it mean to live as churches in these societies, climate change, religious violence, and things like that. So I would say that from generation to generation, there is always a kind of experiment of how do we do our work on the one hand, convergence documents perhaps being the most prominent ones. And on the other hand, there is this tradition of trying to relate and incorporate the results of the bilateral dialogues into our work. Nowadays, I would say that we perhaps lack the institutional capacity to do that to some extent. Well, first of all, we are not asked to do this forum on bilateral dialogues by the Christian World Communions, but because Archbishop Pace is here, we might encourage him to invite us to to do that in the coming years. But secondly, also we often lack, human resources to extend our work there as well. Thank you. Thank you for that.
So let's start taking 2 questions at a time. There's one here at the back, and then we're looking for another hand that might be ready to. Okay, and up in the front.
I'm Paul Patrick. I'm a journalist from Slovakia, and I basically have 2 questions. And you said that unity is willed by God, but I expected you to say willed by Emperor, because the Council of Nicaea was not willed by God. I mean, if literally speaking, it was willed by also someone else who kind of wanted unity, and at the end of the day, there was the creed of the Council of Nicaea was incomplete. It waited another council to be completed, and there were clashes inside. So, is it not that the search for unity will always be like this, incomplete in a way, and there will be progresses and also regresses, and this is part of the second question. 1 or 2 questions, sub-question. It is that we see profound changes, tensions, disunities. You're coming from the Orthodox tradition. What's right now going on in Ukraine, which started even before the war, by the tomos of the foundation of a specific Ukrainian church. So could you please elaborate on this, you said challenges, like self-centeredness, but there are also politics involved, right? Something more more decisive with more power to really disunite and shackle the churches. And this is the thing that you mentioned also, like if we are united, and how does it, or to what extent our internal unity influences the unity of Christians. So again, like, is it unity at all costs? Should we focus on our own unity? Does it make sense, the question?
Okay.
Could you
Thank
just
very much.
elaborate a bit the last part?
Yeah, I mean, like, to what extent should we focus on our own unity in order to be united, and then we can go on with the unity of other churches? Or should we, in the first place, I don't want to mention the Ordo Amoris, like, should we focus on being ecumenical in the first place, and then look in our internal problems, troubles, tensions, theological questions?
Okay. And now let's take a second question up in the front here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At the beginning, you have said you spoke about unity as the will of God, or the prayer of Jesus Christ. For me, unity is a mandatory for all Christians. But we have a problem that, as you have mentioned, among the challenges, self-centeredness. And I will give you two very short examples so that I want you to touch from. I think this the title is a little bit a very global way. So I want to bring you down to the local level. I think 7 or 8 years back, Pope Francis has invited our patriarch from Ethiopia. So he came here. No, before coming here, he was afraid to come here because of the situation in Ethiopia. The Orthodox, the way they understand Catholics and the way we understand them is totally different. So he was afraid, and he worried about to come to Rome. So what he did, he was very smart. So he brought many bishops as much as possible to come here. Because if there is a challenge, the challenge will be not only for him, but also for all the bishops. So the way that we understand them and the way they understand Catholics is totally different. So what shall we do on situations like this? The first question. And then you spoke about also internal fragment or division among even the Catholics, even among other denominations. I will give you a very interesting example. In Ethiopia, 2 years back, there was a civil war in the northern part of Ethiopia. So because of the war, many were affected. So the northern part separated itself from the other part. So at the end of the war, the church from the other part went there so that let's come together. And then they said no. Because while we were in trouble, no one came here to say something. But now at the end of the war, you came. Even the Orthodox went with a group of bishops, with the patriarch. And the bishops, they did not come to welcome the patriarch in the airport. For your surprise, the Muslims, they went there and they were able to reunite themselves. The Christians as a whole, the Protestants, the Orthodox, the Catholics, we are not able to do that. So how can we achieve, how can we apply this desire for unity? So for me, it's a question. I'm not looking for something profound answer, but I want you to touch at least.
Thank you. It's not my business to summarize questions, but just to say, I note a voice from Slovakia, a voice from Ethiopia, very aware of the obstacles in front of us. But over to you.
So coming back to the first two questions, one relating to whether the unity is God's will or the emperor's will. That's actually one of the things that I have found very interesting, is to what extent does the Council of Nicaea at the same time unites us to this date, but also it disunites us in our perspectives on the meaning and the significance of that council. So for many churches, it's actually a kind of historical point when the church surrendered itself to the empire of this world, for example. But I would argue the contrary, and I would argue, first of all, that the will to hold the council originated from the church itself, although it was hijacked by the emperor. And I think there are good historical arguments that can be offered to support that. And secondly, I would say that the Council of Nicaea came to be and became what it is in its aftermath and in the process of its reception. And as we know, it's always the thing with the councils in the churches. They might live or die depending on the reception that they receive in the churches. And in that regard, Council of Nicaea came to life and came to be what it is in what I perceive to be an anti-imperial endeavor of the champions of Nicaea, such as, for example, Athanasius of Alexandria, who fought for Nicaea when the emperors were fighting against it, which is, I think, quite interesting to think about historically. But perhaps your question was not about history itself. Secondly, your other question about whether should we focus on our internal struggles or our external search for unity, that's how I understood it, pretty much. I like the butterfly part. I feel like we can't afford the luxury of choosing between the two, and that my point about call for unity being God's call actually relates to our own internal standing as a church, as churches or as communions, but also our mutual relationships. So we can't afford to choose between the two. And I would say even more so if we are struggling eternally. So whenever we as individuals struggle, we don't deal with our own problems and then seek each other, right? We do the contrary. We seek each other in order to help ourselves with dealing with our own struggles internally as well. So I would say that these two processes not only can complement each other, but they have to be constantly upheld together. And as I mentioned, paradoxically, as we experience, as we tend to share the challenges of our own internal struggles, that sharing actually fosters and creates more unity in some way as well. Coming back to your 2 points, I would say just perhaps one observation, which is that, okay, this whole narrative about unity is obviously kind of universally shaped. It aims to think in global terms, in very general terms, and so on. And the challenge there is that the realities of these unities are very concrete and very contextual, on the other hand. So employing this kind of universal approach to contextual realities doesn't always, it's not an easy process, to say the least. But I would say, based on some of the principles that we talked about and the core desire for unity, it is up to each context to discover how does that unity, for example, works in that particular context. And if I'm not mistaken, you can correct me, but as I understand, in Ethiopia, for example, you would celebrate the Easter on the same date. Is that the case? Yes, because the Western churches, who are also present in Ethiopia, decided to move and celebrate Easter together with the Orthodox majority, right? So, for example, that's an interesting case for me, how the context itself and some contextual practices shape our understanding of how the unity can be achieved as well, on this matter that we are also now seeking to address on a global level.
Thank you very much. Just to note that we are kind of broken searchers for unity. Perhaps a new humility as we're aware of our own faults and internal divisions, our own sins. It can paradoxically help the search for unity. A very interesting point. Now we had 3 people. There was Gigi, third man, and there was I forget who else had their hand up just now. Oh, Demetrius and you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor, for this a beautiful paper. I have a question only regarding with the clarity of the concepts, the terms. Before that, I would just like to say I had the opportunity to work for the Dicastery for the Christian Unity from 2019 to have dialogue with the Orthodox churches and the Assyrian Church of the East. It is well organized, always. But often after the end of the day of each dialogue commission's meeting, I have this question, whether are we considering the term full visible Christian unity with the process, that the process means the working together. While hearing your paper also, it was well presented, but I had a sort of confusion in a positive sense, not in a negative sense, whether you mean, when you use the term full visible Christian unity, do you mean the methodology, the process that we walk together, or is it two separate things? The full visible Christian unity is the end that we can arrive through the walking together. Thank you.
Okay. Second of 3 questions. Behind, yes. We have a new microphone carrier, Yu Hyung from South Korea, who is a graduate of our ecumenical program. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I hope my question will not be misunderstood, but I understand very clearly the importance of Christian unity, and it was well presented, especially with regard to issues of doctrine and all that. But I want to specifically focus on the issue of moral issues, on moral issues, because sometimes, especially we're not in the West, probably some African countries and other countries around, when you talk about doctrinal declarations, sometimes it goes back to the academic level, to those that understand such topics. But then what affects the people directly are actually the moral issues. And for instance, you come to a situation, probably, let's talk about something like the problem of abortion. You have different denominations, Christian denominations, speaking different languages about this issue. And for those who are not Christians and who are looking at Christians, it becomes a scandal. They don't agree on this basic issue. So, for instance, in Africa, we have many, especially Pentecostal, that's one of the fastest growing churches, the Pentecostal church. And now when you come, you see each church has its own teaching about moral ethics and moral issues. Each one has its own different. So we have this problem now, and this is what affects. You can talk about the doctrinal issues is on the intellectual level, but when you come down to what affects the people, is these moral issues. And when we are disagreed on these issues, on these moral issues, then those looking from outside would say they are not united. And so, what are we doing? I've heard of something like Manhattan Declaration of 2009, something like that on abortion. But what effort is being pushed in this direction, especially because it is very pertinent? Thank you.
Thank you. Demetrios. I should have asked everybody to introduce themselves a little bit. A word at this late stage, Demetrios, of introduction.
So, Demetrios Kieramdas from the Angelicum. Thank you, Professor Jeftic, Andrej, for your presentation. You raised up many challenges. The searching of a concept of unity is really very important. And bringing from the idea of recognizing the baptism is a challenge also for our Orthodox tradition. Because, as you said, we have a different concept of full unity, of full communion. My question is, I don't want to bring in public discussion all inter-Orthodox problems, but
why not?
Why not? That's because time is very short. So when your commission comes to deal with what we could call ecclesiological polarization, for example, within the Orthodox Church, you have different concepts of unity within the Orthodox Church regarding, among many other things, primacy. Who, how exercise primacy within the Orthodox Church, and more generally. So how your commission address this issue? You can just bring all Orthodox together at the same table and say we have a consensus, or, I mean, what can your commission offer to this kind of discussions? Thank you.
Yes, we're not letting him off lightly tonight, I think. So there's 3 questions there.
Do you want to take the 4th one? Or?
Okay, yes, okay. Reverend Tara.
Because we have 4 minutes.
That's right, yeah. Then so 4 questions, and then we will... That implies that the last word is given to Andrej here.
It doesn't have to.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Andrej, for a really inspirational portrayal of where we are and seeking full visible Christian unity. Tara Kalouis, the Reformed Church's ecumenical officer in Rome. I want to start firstly saying I'm a former General Secretary of the National Council of Churches in Australia. And as an NCCA, we sought to find a practical way for our member churches to show that there was something that held them together. And in 2004, we developed the multilateral covenant, where churches who were members were able to sign on to different aspects of this covenant together. And the first basis was praying together. One element of the covenant was related to sacraments, and particularly the sacrament of baptism. And we discovered that churches who were not members of the NCCA were able to also sign on to that aspect of recognition, the mutual recognition of one another's baptism. It surprises me when I am in other parts of the world when I hear Catholics and Protestants saying, but we can't recognise each other's baptism in whatever place they are. Firstly, how do we help those practical steps of greater visible unity in one part of the world between denominations be realised and potentially activated in another part of the world? My second question is, when it comes, and you've said it multiple times tonight, when it comes to those formal agreements, it's one thing for the agreements to be made in dialogue groups, world communions, and within the upper echelon, shall we say, of denominations. But how do we bring around practical reception so that people in our congregations every Sunday are able to recognise these agreements and have practical ways of following through on those more formal agreements? Thank you.
Okay, so I have to now remember.
That's right. I was about to say you need a good memory or a quick typing ability on your computer.
So the first question was about how we conceptualize the full visible unity. Is it a state or a method of walking together? I would say similar to when we speak with the medical doctors, for example, and when you ask them what does it mean to be healthy. It's really hard to define what is health. And in that regard, I would also say that it's really hard eventually to define the state of full visible unity, because we see it being, eroded in many of our churches who claim to be in the state in the first place. So my point is, let's try to think about in those terms as something that we are constantly readdressing and trying to maintain. As a virtue, for example, what does it mean to be a virtuous man or woman, or in some aspect, what does it mean to be humble, for example? Is it a state Or is it something that we are constantly invited to question ourselves about? So, I mean, perhaps it's not the best analogy, but I would think more in those kinds of terms, because I think a part of our pessimism about the full visible unity comes from this perspective of the full visible unity as, health or humility as the final goal, which is, we'll know when it is achieved. I think we won't, and we probably won't achieve it that way in the first place. So I think it's also kind of questioning the concept, but also engaging more in the method of growing into the unity in the first place. When it comes to moral issues, I understand that this is, we were talking about this afternoon how there was a slogan that service unites and doctrine divides. I think now it has become the other way around, so now it's much more easier to agree on the doctrine than it is on how we exhibit our service to the world and how we deal with these very social realities, but also realities that relate to human state and so on. I don't have a clear answer to that, to be honest, but again, one of the parts of the Orthodox experience that is not always helpful, but sometimes might be, is not to over-regulate things, in a way. Once you regulate and put, especially if you phrase it as a kind of a doctrinal issue and so on, it becomes a challenge to first of all, to apply it in different contexts, and then it becomes a challenge also of getting these different positions or different stances together. So as I mentioned, Orthodox churches or tradition are often deemed as being kind of in constant chaotic state and lacking kind of organizational structures and whatnot. And that's all obviously something that is justifiably criticized in many ways. But sometimes it helps not to regulate everything. That would be my general comment, perhaps, in that regard. When it comes to the issue of addressing the polarization of, it's good to see Dimitrios, of ecclesiological polarizations, for example, the issue of primacy in the Orthodox Church, this relates actually to the very nature of the World Council of Churches, but also faith and order. We can't do more than what the churches ask us to do. So we don't have the mandate to get together the Orthodox churches if they don't want to get together, and to address any of the issue that they don't want to address. We can help with that if they want us to do that. And I think in that regard, we should give credits to the World Council of Churches because it has, in the recent years, managed really to get official representatives of the Orthodox churches who otherwise don't have spaces and platforms to meet together. So I think there's really a credit to be given there. But when it comes to Faith and Order Commission, as much as we would like to assist or engage, we are, limited by the desire of the churches themselves to engage in these issues. But otherwise, we are happy to do so if there is a move from the churches. And finally, coming back to and I would see your two questions pretty much basically revolving about the issue of reception, which happens in one context, but it doesn't happen in another context, and also which happens on one level of the high kind of church structures, but it doesn't take place on the grassroots level. I see this particularly for faith and order as a continuing challenge. And it has been often repeated that we have done such great work, but the question becomes whether it is received or not. And this is where, then connecting to the previous conversation, it's also about the churches. So the churches themselves have only the capacity, or the communities or the local communities and congregations are the only ones who have the capacity to actually engage in the reception process and to receive what we are producing. On our part, now we are trying to somehow rethink our methodology in a way that we think about the reception in advance when we write the text themselves, so that they are made more appealing and perhaps more inclined to be received by the local congregations and so on. and also to facilitate some seminars, webinars, conversations, and places where we can encourage the churches or the institutions, and perhaps this might be also a kind of that a space to get to know about what is it that we are doing, and to receive some of that work as well. It's a vague answer, but I hope it's
great. It's great. You've also given me my last one-liner. This as a space. I like to think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship with Professor Jeftic, that this has been a wonderful beginning. We've had a quality interaction, so this has been more than just being talked at by Professor Jeftic, although in some ways he's at his best when challenged with a good question, I think. So thank you so much. I invite you now not to rush away, but to come and join us for a drink here, a brindisi. We upped the numbers that we prepared for when we saw how many had registered for our meeting. So don't embarrass us by leaving everything on the tables. And here's just a thought. Perhaps you might consider introducing yourselves at the drinks to one person that you haven't yet met. So thank you very much, and a special thanks to Professor Jeftic.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well done. Okay. Yeah, I think